Okay, so good morning again, everybody. My own name is Annie Fitzgibbon. I'm Director of Member Services at Cork Chamber. And again, delighted to welcome you all here this morning to our SCP webinar around a very exciting topic, again, in association with Cork Chamber Skillnet and ESB Generation and Trading. Just really quickly, the usual housekeeping you're all very familiar with. Just to let you know that this session is being recorded just for our own purposes and files, and just to suggest that we'll leave mics off for this session, but absolutely to use the chat box for Q&A. We always have a really engaging discussion toward the end from across the room. So thanks so much for that. Again, just I want to thank Cork Chamber Skillnet and DSB Generation and Trading, who are our sponsors on this series. We're delighted to have them on board, and it just lets us provide a really good program for you all. I know a lot of you are familiar already with the Sustainable Cork programme, or the SCP, which was created by Cork Chamber in the mid 2020 with the purpose to set a vision for a more sustainable and resilient Cork. And a lot of you will be aware and will have been on these sessions where we've covered topics such as Cork City revitalisation, energy cost savings for businesses, preparing for the CSRD, DEI in a hybrid workplace, innovation for sustainability, and lots of other topics. And now we're in our 5th year, which is hard to believe. We've had nearly 2,000 registrations, so we have a very loyal following, and it's a really, really good session that we run here about 4 times a year. And I suppose as we head further along, maybe halfway into 2024, as Cork strives to become one of Europe's first climate neutral cities, we'll endeavour to run this programme to assist our members and businesses with their businesses around their own plans, etc. So I think the topic for today is particularly timely around business adaptation to climate change and the response or resilience required by businesses. I'm really looking forward to this extremely worthwhile discussion. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our 3 speakers and participants this morning. I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. But for now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ashley Amato, our Public Affairs and Sustainability Executive, who manages this programme, to moderate the session, and she'll introduce our speakers in detail. So over to you, Ashley, and thanks all again, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, Annie. Good morning, all. I'm Ashley Amato, and I run the Sustainable Cork program here at Cork Chamber. And you're all very welcome to this webinar on building resilience, business adaptation to climate change, and the associated extreme weather events that we will be and already are experiencing. And I was really keen to focus in on this topic of climate adaptation as the world, Ireland, and Cork have seen major disruptions on the climate front over the past number of years. And these disruptions will continue even with strong climate action. And it's clear that the business community needs to place a strong focus on building resilience against the impacts of climate change, as well as averting potentially huge losses. And, we saw this last year in Cork with Storm Babette, which brought record rainfall to the south of Ireland. And this led to significant flooding and impacts for business and society. And scientific evidence has shown that this storm was linked to human-induced climate change. Now, adaptation is often overlooked as mitigating climate change or reducing or preventing greenhouse gas emissions is typically the main focus. And businesses do need to continue the drive to transition to a low carbon economy. However, it's evident that with projections from Met Éireann, the World Meteorological Organization, and what we're actually seeing in our changing weather patterns today, that we cannot avoid all of the consequences of climate change. While we continue to reduce emissions, we all need to prepare for and adapt to a world that looks very different. We need to protect our people, our infrastructure, the environment, our food supply, energy, and build resilience across all aspects of the economy and society. And we can even find opportunities for new and better ways of doing things to enhance the resilience of the economy and our society, so that when shocks do occur, such as storms and droughts, we can absorb those shocks and bounce back. Now, I'm looking forward to hearing how we can begin this journey of adaptation and resilience from our expert panelists we have with us today. So first, I'm going to introduce our first speaker today. We have Peter Medway, Climate Action Coordinator at Cork City Council. Peter is responsible for drafting Cork's Climate City Contract, which outlines the city's journey to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the coming years. And prior to joining the council, Peter was an independent consultant working on disaster risk management and climate change in the context of international development. So Peter, over to you. Sorry, Peter, you're just on mute there.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Can you see the screen?
Yep, that's perfect.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. So just to set the context in Cork City a little bit by starting with the vision that the elected members of the Cork City Council have set. In a nutshell, it's to make Cork the best Cork possible, and to make it fairer, healthier, more economically vibrant, and a sustainable place to live, work, and do business. And some of you may have seen the climate action plan that we adopted in February that sets out 3 goals for our transition. First is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible, actually with a target date of 2030. It's an enormous transformation in everything we do in the city. Secondly, to protect and enhance our natural and built environment. And thirdly, to work in partnership and in a well-governed system for this significant change in the way that the city works. Just to give some kind of background information that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Cork's projected to have a rapidly growing population of around 350,000 by 2040. You will be seeing and be aware of the very large investments that are coming into the city, both public and private, in terms of transport, housing, and other sectors, which to my mind are a huge opportunity for the business community. And in the City Council itself, we're very busy with trying to climate-proof everything that we do. All our services and all of our policy areas must have a net positive climate impact as quickly as possible. Just to touch on where the emissions are coming from, this slide is taken from our baseline emissions inventory that we published last year using 2018 data. You can see that most of the emissions come from our housing stock because of poorly insulated buildings and fossil fuel heating systems primarily, road transport, and buildings and industrial process emissions from the commercial and industrial sectors. Taken together, that's 85% of the emissions in Cork City. You'll note that the public sector has direct control and ownership of about 7% of the emissions. The City Council's share of that is about 2%. We own very few of the assets in the city. And so our role is obviously to take responsibility for decarbonising our own assets, but also to provide leadership, support, and influence to the wider community so that we can move together towards net zero. Just looking at, what is adaptation and what is resilience? We build resilience in the city by addressing the root causes of climate change to mitigate emissions, and at the same time to adapt to the changes that are caused by the emissions that have already been released into the atmosphere. And as Ashley had suggested, we can't avoid all of the negative consequences of climate change, and we will also experience some potential opportunities from it as well. This slide just talks about the mandate for change that we believe that exists in Ireland, and these kind of data points have been replicated in our own research at the city level. But the people responding to this Environmental Protection Agency research from 2023 are essentially your staff and your customers. And so it's important to know that the number of people who see climate change as a significant risk, the number of people that consider that we're being harmed by climate change now, and the number of people that, as consumers, are ready to take action. And I think particularly important for government authorities like the council, as well as the business community, that people are increasingly sensitive to greenwashing, and they want to know that changes that are being made are authentic and genuinely impactful. This slide is taken from our Cork City climate risk assessment that was done in 2023. And you can see from this how we're expecting up to mid-century, up to 2050, the climate hazards to change in terms of frequency and impact. And you'll be very familiar, if you've lived in Cork for any length of time, the important risk of flooding. And I've no doubt that many of you have been involved in conversations and thinking about how do we make ourselves resilient to the flood risk in the city. But what I wanted to talk about this morning a bit more was a hazard that it doesn't get much consideration in Ireland, and that is extreme temperatures. And you'll note from this draft that both drought and heat wave are projected to become more frequent and more impactful as we go along. And this graph, which is taken from the EPA's 5-year assessment of Irish climate change context, published last year, shows what this is likely to mean for people who are alive now. You'll see that the 3 warmest years on record in Europe have occurred from 2020, and that the 10 warmest years ever experienced have happened since 2007. It should be noted that the evidence coming out of Copernicus is that Europe is warming faster than any other region in the world. And just to note, and some of you have been on holiday in mainland Europe in the summer over the last couple of years, but 2022 in particular will have recalled the stories of forest fires and extreme heat. Over 60,000 excess deaths happened in Europe in 2022 due to heat. And so this is a kind of warning sign, and this is why extreme temperature is important. Floods cause damage, floods cost money, but floods don't tend to kill people. Extreme temperatures do kill people, and this is the risk that we're facing here, especially obviously for vulnerable groups, which are the elderly and the very young. And this is the picture in Ireland itself, where Met Éireann defines a heat wave that triggers increasing mortality among vulnerable groups is 5 days above 25 degrees centigrade. I think, you know, whimsically, we all kind of dream of a summer where we have 5 days above 25 degrees centigrade, but there are kind of important consequences to that for vulnerable groups and others as temperatures continue to rise. And it's worth noting that in Ireland, where we tend to associate the weather with being cool, we are breaking temperature records every year and every month almost. And just to summarize here some of the measures and the benefits of adaptation actions in Cork. Some of the adaptation measures that you might consider in regards to heat going forward are about working schedules, workplace safety guidance, air conditioning and sustainable cooling, and many others. And all of those things can produce benefits to your business around productivity, around less absence from sick, health co-benefits for you and your employees and customers, and reduction of the urban heat island effects, among others. And this is just a presentation of some of the adaptation options and benefits more broadly against climate change. I'm not going to go into the details for time. And this slide just sets out the context in regards to retrofitting, in regards to the national targets for business and industry. By 2030, we want 30% of commercial buildings to achieve a BER rating of B or higher, 40% emissions reductions for large industries, 50,000 commercial buildings with renewable energy and heating. But when we look at the local picture, we can see we're a long way off for this. And keep in mind that retrofitting is good for both heating and cooling. The average non-domestic BER rating for commercial buildings is D1. So there's a way to go. And given that we have 1,500 or so commercial buildings within the city boundary, that's a lot of work to be undertaken to address the energy efficiency and the ability to heat and cool sustainably in a short period of time. And so what's the story? I guess what do we do now? Look, there is plenty of knowledge and support available out there from the City Council, from national institutions like the EPA, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. Use it. And I guess another key message is that climate action is a huge commercial opportunity. We've done some analysis to look at the costs of retrofitting 80% of the dwellings of different types to a B2 BER rating. That's a 2.3 billion euro market. We've looked at electrifying our fleet of private cars, of light and heavy goods vehicles in the city. That's a 1.9 billion euro market. So we can see this climate change as both a threat, but also as an opportunity. And I think the last and rather well-worn message in regards to adaptation is, if you don't act now, you'll have to pay more later. So we do encourage early action, and ourselves as a city council are committing ourselves to do that in regards to our own asset base. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter, for that. Yeah, one of the key takeaways there is one of those slides that you showed on the opinions of climate change. And it's clear, like even you mentioned at the end, in terms of the value of climate adaptation, that there's huge opportunities for businesses, from new business opportunities, but also just in terms of expanding and enhancing kind of their loyalty of their consumer base and responding to these challenges that we're facing. So thanks very much. And we'll hopefully get into that a bit more in the Q&A session. And just a reminder for those on the call, as questions or comments do come to mind, do use the chat box. So now I'd like to introduce our second speaker. We have Ken Leahy, Associate Director at Arup and Chartered Civil and Environmental Engineer. Ken has over 25 years of experience leading sustainable infrastructure projects, particularly major flood relief schemes. As an Associate Director at Arup's Cork office, Ken serves as Arup Ireland Water Business Leader, Europe's Flood Resilience Leader, representing Europe on Arup's Global Water Executive. So Ken, over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. We'll share. So hopefully you can all see my screen.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. So morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to just say thanks to Cork Chamber for the opportunity to speak to you there this morning on what I think is a topic really that represents an existential issue for all of us. So I'm going to give you a sense of some of the work that ARP have been involved in globally, as well as an overview of some projects that I've been involved in, relevant projects more locally in Cork that may be of interest. So firstly, to give a sense of context, often when I'm asked to speak, this is a slide I use. So every year the World Economic Forum publishes its research on the top 10 risks over both a 2-year and a 10-year horizon. And I've been monitoring this for a good many years, and what's often looked disruptors in the short term, typically environmental and particularly climate-driven risks dominate the medium to long-term horizon, that 10-year outlook. As you can see from all the green items there, really our longer term risks and challenges are all around the environment and particularly climate change. So from a business perspective that'll be relevant to this audience, current estimates suggest that climate change impacts will cost the global economy $54 trillion US dollars by 2040. So given this negative economic impact of climate change, mitigation and adaptation really must be a priority for all businesses with an ambition to sustain beyond the short term. And this level of change, it just can't be put on the long finger. And the quote on screen there from my colleague, I think is particularly pertinent, that it's now a boardroom priority worldwide to consider climate change adaptation. So I suppose the question might be, what does climate resilience look like? What does adaptation look like? Really, this is going to differ at different scales between national policy, city scale, and it's going to differ amongst organizations. But really the common thread, I think, is that there's going to have to be a fundamental or radical rethink by all organizations about what is truly important and how we should plan and operate into the future. So from a global context, over the last couple of decades, we've been doing a lot of work with like-minded organizations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, looking at ways and means to assess resilience at a city scale. And we've developed a framework to do that and to look at means to improve resilience. So the map on screen there just shows some of the cities where that framework has been applied and where we've assisted cities in looking at resilience. And that global experience really provides us with a depth and breadth of knowledge, which we can apply in assisting any organization at any scale. So I'm going to drop down a little bit from global scale now to look at more local projects that might be of relevance. The first project I'm going to talk about is Middleton Flood Relief Scheme. As Ashley mentioned earlier, Storm Babette, I think, was a particularly significant event recently. East Cork probably was most affected. Now we've been involved in looking at the early stages of the development of a flood relief scheme in Middleton over the last number of years. But last October, during Storm Babette, an extreme flood event occurred in Middleton. We're finalising the analysis of that at the moment, but based on our analysis, it's clear that it's significantly greater than a 100-year flood, and in all probability is closer to a 1 in 1,000-year flood. Now, I've been practicing as a flood risk management professional for about 20 years. And over that time, when I mention terms like a 1 in 1,000-year flood, I often get that kind of skeptical look from people as in it's never going to happen. But I think really Storm Babette serves as that wake-up call for any skeptics out there that this change is real. There's no doubt the frequency and intensity of extreme events, such as occurred during Babette, will only increase as climate change gathers pace, and we have to be prepared for that. So when we're looking at flood relief schemes, we have to be very clear that the schemes are sufficiently adaptable to cater for what is an uncertain future, as well as often dealing with complex issues at present. The other key point I would make is that there's lots of competing project infrastructure projects. This is an example of some other projects happening in Middleton that all need to be integrated together. And I think now more than ever, there's a need for greater alignment and greater work across agencies, across jurisdictions, and ensuring that we're delivering infrastructure that's design-led and is adaptable for climate change. The other point I really wanted to make today, I suppose, is that as part of that adaptation, we really now need to be looking more at working in conjunction with rather than against nature, valuing biodiversity and ensuring that nature and biodiversity are an important part of future schemes. So in Middleton, as well as considering more traditional approaches, we undertook a detailed assessment of the benefit of implementing various natural flood management solutions. Now, what we find at the moment is that current legislation, land use management practices and structures often limit our ability to deliver such solutions. And that's something that's going to have to change because these types of solutions will need to become a greater part of the overall toolkit, as it were, going forward for flood relief schemes. And what we did establish in Middleton was that natural flood management measures may well form a significant part of future adaptation over the lifetime of the scheme. So, this is an example of a key public space in Middleton, where I also want to make the point about placemaking in nature. So very much design-led. How can we incorporate infrastructure, flood risk infrastructure that's non-intrusive, that blends in with the environment, that creates better public spaces, better amenity, that provides wider benefits, particularly around health and well-being. So this is more and more becoming part of the discussion point, and will be needed to allow us to deliver infrastructure that's acceptable to the public. As part of Middleton, it was chosen as a pilot study by the Office of Public Works for a climate change adaptation plan. So this was the first scheme climate change adaptation plan prepared in Ireland. And arising out of it, OPW are producing a guidance document which will be used and rolled out across all the flood schemes in Ireland. So these plans are essential in setting out a clear plan of when and if further interventions may be required, what they might entail, and crucially provides an evidence base that the solution that's proposed now is compatible with all possible future interventions, so that we can be certain that it presents a no regret solution and we can proceed with the current step with confidence. And this is just a decision tree. So again, this is a graphical demonstration of potential future adaptation pathways that might be needed and the options that will be available for future generations. And, you know, on this topic, I would say a key part of delivering any of these schemes is truly engaging with the communities, the local communities, and putting them at the heart of the decision-making process. And how we deliver these schemes and collaborating will be really important going forward to explain the why we're doing what we're doing. The second example is even closer to home, so Cork Docklands. So the redevelopment of Cork Docklands has been a long-standing ambition of Cork City Council for many decades. And previous master plans sought to kind of raise the whole area of the land bank above flood level, but because of the scale and the fact that there's existing industrial development ongoing, really there was some practical impediments to its redevelopment. So what we've done there, assisting the city, is developed an integrated placemaking and nature-based strategy that acknowledges Docklands as a border location and creates a vision that can be delivered strategically on a phased basis, with infrastructure being replaced on a phased basis, the redevelopment from industrial use to mixed use, and the two coexisting at the same time, as well as allowing for the development in the context of continual sea level rise. So it's very much looking at it in a way that understands we can't simply jump to what we want it to be. It's going to have to be done over a phased way. So the plan has to work, that transition has to work. So again, the other thing is that the design levels and the strategy have to be considered in the context of sea level rise, when that might happen, when quayside defences are appropriate, at what point in the future it may be necessary to put in a harbour-wide solution. And the key message really I'd be saying here to people is that it's really important that we understand the timing of each intervention and ensure that's appropriate, and ensure that we're always basing our decisions on the best available science. And finally, this image just gives a glimpse of how new communities will live, in looking at 10-minute cities, sustainable public transport systems, where flood infrastructure includes open water features such as swales and ponds and provides an amenity value, as well as its technical requirements in very much an integrated design-led way. So I think that's finishes me up. So Ashley, thank you again, and thanks to the audience for the time to share.
Thanks, Ken. It's great to see the projects taking place in Cork, and especially around those integrated approaches to that adaptation, and as well that comment around health and well-being. I think is really important, especially for any communications professionals that are with us today, that, adaptation and climate action in general, it's a public health matter as well. So thanks very much. So now we're going to move on to our third speaker. We have Daniel Schmitz-Remberg today, founder of DSR and Partners, the Climate Adaptation Advisors. Daniel has been working as a strategy consultant since 2006. He co-founded Accenture Sustainability Services and previously has worked on numerous green issues in various industries and international projects along the value chain. And recognizing the urgency of climate change adaptation, he shifted his focus to supporting companies in this crucial area. So Daniel, over to you.
Hello. Yeah, great to connect. Great to connect with Ireland. I'm just trying to find the right window. Here it is, so I can share with you. And interestingly, I was really appreciating Peter's background, giving about climate science, showing us the need to adapt. And I really like to hear Ken's tangible examples. And now I'd like to guide you through some technical perspectives and, of course, one definition as well. We've heard the definition between mitigation and adaptation from Peter already. We heard from Ken what it is like from our perspectives. When I talk to clients, often climate change directly kind of pops up in the mind, and people seeing windmills and people thinking about net zero. That's why I'd like to differentiate, saying, okay, mitigation, saving the climate, so to say, is all about greenhouse gases. While when we talk about adaptation, it's about saving humans and saving agriculture and assets and value chain. So while the one perspective is on CO2, the other one is on real things. And the CO2 part is helping us ideally in the next decades to come, because it takes a while until the CO2 takes effect on the climate in its full amount, while adaptation can save you and your communities or your value chain already tomorrow. I mean, depending on how long this project takes. So whenever you embark on a discussion on climate change, try to make crystal clear what is it where we're talking about. And you may think, oh, we need to concentrate on mitigation. Yes, that's true. But we should also do in parallel some things on adaptation. And you may think now in front of your computer, what is the fair share? How much should I concentrate on mitigation and adaptation? When we think about public finance, when we think about private-public partnerships, when we think about your company, how much should you do in mitigation and adaptation? And a fair share is probably not what we've got today. Today, the split is 95-5. Doesn't sound right? And when you think about the communities that get a windmill next to a flood damage, this is a bit of cynical. So let's talk about certain tech. So two things you can expect from my presentation right now. Some tangible technology advancements from the adaptation economy, really emerging. And the second one, today, world premiere. I choose this call for the County of Cork to unleash my corporate adaptation framework. to unveil. I think unveil is a better word. Excuse me, I'm German. I'm sometimes switching maybe to a wrong word, and you let me know, but you understand. So what is it about the technology? Climate risk analysis. So you've got software companies like Jupiter Intelligence or EHAP that are really capable and giving your specific site an idea, depending on the climate scenario, what's happening in terms of higher floods, higher temperature, and what amount. So Jupiter, as an example, they have 11,000 KPIs for every 10-meter point in the world. Early warning is the next step. Some company like Climate Sense, another tech company, they are layering certain maps over each other, connecting them with AI, and they are really insightful for heat early warnings in cities. Maybe Arup is also working with them. Inside robotics is some combination in wildfire prediction, and Opti is, I think, for me, an eye-opening technology that is dealing with floods, but not in protecting against floods, but thinking about what a flood is doing, all the wastewater that is created. So Opti is forecasting where the flood is hitting and what are the threats, how the flood water becomes hazardous waste actually. And so they are coping with the wastewater eventually. Let's take a look to the technologies. So this is a deep dive into Climate Sense. It looks similar, actually, Ken, to your graph, what you showed us. So this is the way how Climate Sense is layering historic data with real-time temperature measuring, with buildings information and scenarios. So each of the communities, they can take a look what to do. Where should I take action? And we see here little red dots. Yeah, we should maybe build a terrace or some cooling function for the public here rather than in the green areas where they have already planted many trees. Actually, they see the effect of those measures. Another connectivity part, like for instance robotic, though they have video cameras, they have satellite pictures, they have maps, they have alert functions, and they're analyzing it with a really capable software so that wildfires can be detected much earlier. Because it makes really a difference how early you detect a wildfire. After 6 hours, it's hardly possible to extinguish them easily. So every hour you detect it earlier, you can minimize the damage from wildfires. And as we heard from Peter, heat is really on the rise, and wildfires is one of the big threats. Google is doing great stuff, and here can nearly provide forecasting for up to, I think, 0.5 billion people living next to river bassins. So they are using their Google Maps, applying hydrological information. And so you see the little green dots here, where they have really good up to 7 days forecasting capability for river floods. So give me, for the last moments, here's the very moment for the framework. So I'm mapping 2 dimensions in the first place. The first dimension is the stage of adaptation. You had an idea already while I was presenting the case studies. Foresight, preparation, protection during an event, and the recovery after an event. And when you are taking a look to your very business situation where you're in, you may wonder, do those four stages apply to my supply chain or my raw materials, to my assets, or to my products or services, or even to my employees and stakeholders? Yeah. Let me give you some examples. I think, let's say a pharma company, they want to know how climate is impacting their products. So they take a look how the disease patterns will change. So this is a kind of a foresight thing on the products. In Germany, there's a good example from the German railway. They have screened the entire infrastructure and made a climate risk analysis on their rail infrastructure and taking action. This is a bit of a preparation part, so 2B. For the stakeholder part, maybe a farming example is good, because you have a lot of farming and dairy industry, right, in Cork. When something is hitting a region, you need to think about recovery. So Nestle, as a consumer goods company, they are strongly helping their farmers to recover from floods and heat strokes in their supply chain. Probably you are very well insured against climate hazards. The insurance industry, they are taking actions as well. On the one hand, they are providing additional products against climate risks. On the other hand, they are also cutting certain services, because certain areas, let's say in California, you can't insure wildfire damages anymore. And why is it? Because the insurance companies, they take a look to their services and how beneficial it is to provide services in certain regions. So they make a strong preparation for their products. This 2x2 metrics, I have collected 160 case studies underneath, but I'm also structuring them by their very time horizon, how this measure is kind of taking action. Is it a short-term measure, something like building a dam? Yeah, this is like when it's ready, it's working tomorrow, or is it rather a long-term perspective? A regional focus is important, because certain measures are only helpful in let's say India, other ones are helpful in Canada. I've clustered my examples by 20 industries. So that's why I can pick, let's say, a bit of agriculture example here, pharma example here, logistics example there. And it's more and more important to think about the type of solutions. This is a broad variety in the adaptation economy. Is it a deep tech or a low tech thing? Is it a software? Is it even a nature-based solutions? I think Ken showed us how these hidden measures in a city can turn a city into a sponge city. Yeah, and or is it even a policy, like educating your staff how to protect themselves in a heat wave? I hope this was helpful for you, and I would be interested in the discussion round. Where would you see your most urgent area to act in this 4x4 metrics? Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Daniel. That was really informative, and it's great to see that framework. Some really clear steps and actions there, and thanks for unveiling it with us here in Cork. And as well, it's really good to see some of those business opportunities that are available in terms of solutions for adaptation. Great. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A session. We have around 15 minutes or so for that. So we're going to start off. There's actually a question in the chat box there from Lisa. Are there any tools or methodologies available to help conduct comprehensive cost-benefit analysis for adaptation measures in infrastructure? Ken, do you think you could take that one?
I can indeed. Yeah, I think this is a conversation that is often comes up as to how do we value the benefit, because generally valuing the cost is relatively straightforward, but quite often traditional means of valuing benefit tends to be limited kind of economic benefit, wider societal benefit, long-term benefit to health and well-being is much harder to allow for. So this is something I think that a lot of agencies now are looking at to see how do we justify the business case if traditional metrics are kind of suggesting it's marginal. We all know that there's probably a better case, but trying to actually get that down on paper is a challenge. So a lot of work is ongoing in this space at the moment. We've been doing a lot of work in the UK with the Environment Agency around wider business case in this space. So it's fair to say it is evolving. And I think also for businesses and corporations, it will be necessary to look at this in a different way. I think the biggest thing from a business perspective is it needs to be, the business case needs to be looked at on a whole life basis over a much longer term, not just a short term return on investment, but a longer term return on investment will be the big change, I think.
Great. Our next question here, I might direct at Peter. What are some of the common challenges businesses or cities face when attempting to implement climate adaptation measures, and how can they overcome them?
Okay, I guess I think of a couple of things here. One is status quo bias, people's tendency to prefer what they've got in front of them, even though it may be suboptimal in the context of climate change and the challenge of imagining an alternative future. And I think the second one is considerations around the opportunity costs that one has to take into account when making investment choices. And I guess in the adaptation context, it's that choice between spending money on today's visible need versus that potential future risk that's raised by climate change. And I think Ken's presentation addressed one of the most important ways of dealing with both of those things, which is around co-creation and engagement in the community with different stakeholder groups, from citizens to businesses to academics and others, so that we can ensure that people have sufficient awareness of future risk and what it means in terms of the choices that we have to take today.
Yeah, definitely. It's about bringing everyone on board along the journey. Great, Daniel. We have another question for you. Can you tell us more about the business opportunities available in adaptation? You discuss AI and technology throughout your presentation. So how can businesses leverage these advancements to develop different innovative solutions for adaptation? And are there specific sectors or industries that you're seeing the most potential for this growth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, John, for the question. And I do see that certain exposed industries like agriculture or real estate, they're already taking action. But they are taking action in a way that is, they try it out. So then they have, I heard the stories, they have a summer intern, and the summer intern then is obliged to do some risk analytics. And after the summer internship, they come up with a map and they make use of it. So it's barely stepping into the opportunities, and we need to guide them a bit further into the array of AI technologies. And this is what I presented. There are a lot of software companies out there providing solutions. But interestingly, John, companies need to dare that step. And currently they're all buried with those sustainability reporting initiatives. And for them, they need to have this eye-opening moment. What is the art of the possible? So that's why it's good that we talk. In terms of risk analytics, you can do a lot more in understanding the risks. Then secondly, you need to integrate it into your processes. Where is it actually hitting you the hardest? And third is, what is the return on resilience investment internally to better understand what is a good measure that you can do with the company. So finding a language after understanding the technology, finding the language to convince your CFO that this investment is a good one, and making the business case for resilience happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that return on resilience investment kind of goes back to one of the points that Peter was making earlier in terms of the business case and everything around adaptation. So we have another question. Now this is, I guess, more around mitigation, around public transport. I'd say, Peter, you could answer this around what the council is doing to enhance public transport. And I know there's a lot of plans in the city to do this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess the first thing to say is to be clear about roles and responsibilities in all of this, and the actual commissioning and construction of public transport systems falls to the National Transportation Authority, and then the transport companies themselves, Irish Rail and Bus Éireann in particular. And both of those companies and the NTA have got a big program of works. We've heard about a lot of progress in regards to the rail planning, the improvements and electrification of the Cork to Middleton line, the better connections and increased frequency of services up to Dublin, the fare changes that have happened in the last couple of years, and the plans for the Cork commuter rail system that are coming forward in practical ways, with the designs coming up for 8 new stations and so on and so on. So I think that what is being done largely falls outside of the council's control, although of course we do have a facilitative role in terms of the planning permissions and other measures that we can take to try to help those processes along. Where we do have more agency is around the active travel network, and people in Cork will have seen quite a lot of investment over the last, well, since COVID in particular, in regards to building more greenways and active travel systems, and those things are commissioned more by the City Council with financing from the NTA, and so we'll be seeing more of that, and hopefully faster in coming years as well. So that's our part in the travel piece.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, these things, they do take time, and the plans are there. It's just a matter of, you know, us moving along, and that's the direction that we are going in as a city. Great. So I just actually have a question of my own here that I think kind of leans on nicely for that, for Ken, in terms of, you know, you mentioned integrated approaches to adaptation and in terms of our infrastructure in Cork throughout your presentation. It's obviously a key focus for Arab, which is great to see. So what are some of the key components that should be considered in order to get some of those win-wins, whether that's in terms of placemaking, biodiversity, green spaces, and so on?
Thanks, Ashley. It's a really good question, and you know, it pulls me back to Peter's point there about status quo bias. I think, you know, we have done things traditionally in a way and using systems and structures and agencies that was fit for purpose kind of for in the past. But ultimately, more and more, you know, we would need to do things across agencies. So if I take my area of expertise in water, you know, we've lots of different agencies involved. You've Ishcare for wastewater, you've the local authority for surface water, you've the Office of Public Work for river and tidal flooding, Waterways Ireland, you know, you've DPA for water quality. And when we look at projects like natural flood management, that has benefits for both water quantity, i.e. too little or too much, and water quality. So how can we get a better alignment there? Equally, land use management is going to be a huge thing. So to deliver this infrastructure, you know, there needs to be alignment in terms of agriculture and farming. Clearly, there's climate mitigation aspects around agriculture and particularly beef farming. So all of these multifaceted pieces, how do we have a conversation? How do we change our legislation and our structure to facilitate those? And I think that for me is the piece that we need to probably look at to see, are our structures set up in a way that facilitates a different way of looking at these things, our planning processes, our consultation processes. You know, is there a way of delivering this change faster? And I think the short answer is it's a work in progress. A lot of time, the work we're trying to do is kind of probe and challenge, I think, and educate and get people to think about this, as I mentioned in the presentation, in a radically different way. So I'm not sure, does that answer the question? It probably sets out the challenges, I think, Ashley, and like all of these things, it's a work in progress, I think, to find better ways. But, you know, even if I take the example of Middleton, the climate change plan, you know, having the conversation around flood risk management in Cork is very much around, is there a strategy for the long term, just not for the now, but also for the long term, and setting and explaining the context of the first step in the context of that long-term strategy. So communication is going to be a huge part of this, I think, and education.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, some of what you mentioned before about, you know, maybe that we work in silos quite often, but I think that's kind of a key role of the EU climate mission cities, is to kind of break down some of those silos. And as Peter mentioned in his presentation, around different governance structures. So I might just ask Peter a question on that, in terms of how does the EU mission cities, is that facilitating the integration of mitigation and adaptation? Is that being facilitated all through it? Is it a focus within that mission?
Thanks. Well, yes and no, I guess, is the answer to that one. Being an EU kind of set of programs, they do tend to kind of split things out, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. And so there is actually a separate EU mission on adaptation to climate change that is running kind of concurrently with the mission on climate neutral cities, which is dealing with the mitigation side of things predominantly. We're participants in both, I should say, and we recognise that the adaptation challenge is equally as important as the mitigation challenge. I guess it throws up a really practical set of constraints for us in terms of our bandwidth, our organizational capacity to follow two distinct things with their own funding, opportunities with their own learning opportunities, sort of separated out. And so I would say, honestly, we're far less advanced in regards to taking advantage of the opportunities that come to us from the adaptation mission than we are on the mitigation mission. But at the same time, it's something that we fully intend to exploit to the extent possible, as and when we can. I think that there is a strong argument for kind of integrating these two things. They're two sides of the same coin ultimately. And so I suppose when it comes to looking at things like our local authority climate action plan, which was adopted in February, then you will see that we're bringing together actions that are both adaptive, mitigating, or both together. And I think that ultimately is the way to go, practically speaking. If for no other reason that we have only got a certain amount of carrying capacity for more and more specialized plans, at some point they have to be brought together. So that's tending to be the approach that we do it. But of course, at the same time, we have to respect the kind of specificities and requirements of these individual missions as laid out by the EU. So there's a bit of a paradox to resolve there, I think.
Great. And just to say to everyone, Daniel's tech has gone down. So I see there's a question here for him from Sam, and I'll make sure that and he's back. So maybe we can just finish off on this last question for Daniel. Hi, Daniel. You were able to join us again. Good to see you. We just have one final question from Sam here from Consortia Co for you, Daniel, in terms of do you see Germany undertaking social return on investment in public procurement, where the contracting authority establishes a percentage of the award criteria to achieve tangible eco-social outcomes? So a very specific question there. And do you think there's potential for this in Cork or Ireland?
Because you in Cork, Ireland, you have specific criteria that would match it, I assume.
To my knowledge, it would be that we have the corporate sustainability reporting directive, which I'm sure this is a part of, but that's throughout the EU as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know in terms of this this specific question here.
Working with many companies on the CSRD, and many are struggling to get the basics done. So the basics means, do I get some CO2? Do I understand what actually my footprint is? And do I get a bit of an understanding about resilience? About those scores that you mentioned, this will be at least taking some more years, because they are hard, and they're hard prioritizing their amendments of their sustainability reporting. So when you take any hope and advancements in that specific area from German companies, it will take some time probably. When you get to a certain industry like textile, I'm working for textile companies, for dairy companies a lot, Yes, specific for their supply chain. Yeah, in textile, you need to take a look to the workers, and of course, they have those KPIs at hand and are taking decisions based on it. In dairy, it's rather an environmental standard and how the animals are. So it's really a specific question, yes, but you have to do it even more specific for the very industry and for the very part of the supply chain you're looking at.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. So I think that's all the time we have today. I know there's other questions in the chat, but I'll make sure that we try to get some answers for you and might just send those on directly to the viewers who are asking them. So just before I wrap up, I just wanted to throw some information into the chat box for anyone who's interested. So for those looking for further support and information on adaptation, National Adaptation Ireland is a great resource. So I've just thrown that in to the chat box. And I'm also sending in a link to Climate Adapt, where you can find further case studies from across the EU that may be relevant to your sector. And then as one final piece of information, hope this isn't too much overload for everyone here, you'll see a link to a UCC Introduction to Sustainability and Business course. Now, this is a 5 ECT micro-credential course, and it's usually €1,500, but via Cork Chamber Skillnet, we have 10 complimentary places available. Right, so I won't keep you any longer. So I'd like to say thank you so much to our speakers, Peter, Ken, and Daniel, for taking the time to join us this morning and share your knowledge and insights with us. It was extremely valuable and great to see the changes coming from our city, coming to our city, the work that Arab is doing, and as well for Daniel for unveiling his corporate framework for adaptation. Thanks so much to our sponsors, Cork Chamber Skillnet and ESB Generation Trading, for your continued support for the Sustainable Cork program. Thanks to our viewers for being here and joining in on the conversation. And thanks so much to Vicky on our events team for helping me run this webinar. So make sure to check out corkchamber.ie for more info on upcoming events and webinar. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks.
Contact.